Happy New Year's, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Elemental Journey, where we will explore the world of the Avatar universe. On today's episode, I'll be talking about if Aang was really the last air nomad. We know he was the last airbender, but do we know if he was really the last air nomad? Some of you would say yes, others of you would say no. In my opinion, I believe Aang wasn't the last air nomad. As we all know, him and Appa were frozen in an iceberg for about 100 years while the war was going on. But if he didn't run away, would he have died when the Fire Nation attacked? Or would he been able to escape? But I see it as if Aang didn't flee and stayed, the monks would have protected him at all cost because he was the Avatar. They probably would have taken him to the Earth Kingdom where he could have learned all the elements. Now I know some of you would say, Cat, how would he learn firebending with a war going on against the Fire Nation? Well, let me tell you, all because the war was going on didn't mean that the Fire Nation people agreed with Fire Lord Sozin and his decisions to rule all the other nations and wipe out the air nomads. Just like John, he didn't agree with the war, and he didn't agree with the destruction it was doing. Because John trained Commander Zhao. But there was also discipline that goes along with firebending, and Zhao just wanted to use his firebending for destruction and power and evil, and John was against that. But now back to Aang being frozen in the iceberg along with Appa, since the Fire Nation did attack and wipe out the air nomads. So we think. I'm not quite sure if you guys know what the word nomad means, but it's a member of people not having a permanent home, kind of like travelers. So when Sozin decided to attack the air temples, not all of the nomads were there. Some of them have escaped, most likely being in the Earth Kingdom. But if you ever read the comics, there's a comic titled Avatar Lost Adventures, where Aang finds a merchant selling an air gnome necklace, just like the one we see on Monk Gyatso's corpse. So the merchant stated that a man came the day before and sold it to him, and he believed that he came from the mountains. So that night, Aang travels up to the mountains and finds a cave full of air relics, just to find out it's a trap by, you guessed it, the one and only Commander Zhao. So Zhao tells Aang that it was an old trick used by Fire Lord Sozin to lure in all the surviving air nomads, to lure them there and then wipe them out. And it also looked like that the Fire Nation would spread rumors throughout the Earth Kingdom about there being a safe house for the air nomads, so for like refugees. But I don't believe that all of them fell for that trick. A lot of them had to be smart enough. Now, I know some of them wanted to believe that there were other survivors, but others also knew that it could have been a trap. So some of them, the ones that lived, did stay in hiding. They didn't fall for the trick, and they stayed in hiding by growing out their hair, covering and hiding their tattoos, and even stopped bending. And most likely, a lot of them gave up their teachings to just survive and blend in with the Earth Kingdom natives. Wouldn't you give up something if it meant you could live? I know I would. So all because Aang was the last airbender didn't mean he was the last air nomad. We have some proof in The Legend of Korra. The only remaining airbenders are Tenzin and Tenzin's kids, which are Jinora, Ikki, and Milo. After Aang died, however, it all changed with the harmonic conversion. If you don't know, the harmonic conversion was a huge event where the planets aligned and the spirit world reconnected with the physical world. Due to that, many who were unable to bend suddenly were able to bend without any reason, like Aang's sons Bumi, Zaire, and even Opal, which is Top's granddaughter. So to some people, and even myself, when I first seen Korra, I thought it was random. But the more I watched it, it started to make a little bit more sense. Now, I assumed that when Korra opened the portal to the spiritual world and the physical world, that Bumi got airbending because he was the son of Aang. But that also pushes to everybody else. So now we know that some of the air nomads had to survive Sozin's attack. As we know, bending is dependent on two things: spirituality and heritage. To be able to bend is something that is passed down through generations, but can also skip generations, Bumi being an example. That doesn't mean the bending isn't there, it's just recessive. Like Katara, her mother and her father were not benders. So that means someone in their family tree had to be a waterbender, whether it was her grandparents, her great grandparents, and so forth. You just can't bend outside of your abilities. Later, down the line, we do see two different types of benders getting together. That's what made Republic City. But they can still only hold one element. For example, Mako and Bolin. Their father was a descendant from the Earth Kingdom, and their mother was a descendant from the Fire Nation. They were each born with a different element, but not both. But back to the people we thought were non-benders. The only way they could have had that element of air, or sustain the element of air, was to be a descendant of original air nomad. If you notice Kai from The Legend of Korra, he grew up in the Earth Kingdom, same as Opal. And the comics say that there were surviving air nomads. The surviving air nomads traveled to the Earth Kingdom for refuge. Even though they gave up their teachings, that didn't mean that they couldn't stop living. They hid who they were and started a new life in the Earth Kingdom, having families and passing down their bending abilities. The descendants of any of the air nomads would know nothing about air nomadics, the air nomadic cultures. No spiritual, no bending. No bending means no airbenders. The harmonic conversion relinked the spirit world to the physical world, and the ancestors to their descendants. So without the harmonic conversion, we would have never seen all those airbenders popping up in the Legend of Korra. And like Tenzin said, his father would have been so proud to see all those airbenders, and that the culture was restored and Tenzin was able to teach them the ways, which I found very heartwarming. So, in that case, with the original air nomads to the new generations of airbenders. But with all this information, I truly do believe Aang was not the last air nomad. Even after Sozin's comet, it could have been possible for Aang to come across some of these air nomads without even realizing it. Just like King Bumi, who was 112, the air nomads could have been just as old and still have been alive. But they also, some of them most likely died by the time Aang was unfrozen. But while Aang was taking his 100 year-old nap in that iceberg, a lot of them did survive. They lived their life. They had families, and then they died. He could have also ran into one of the descendants, one of the descendants beforehand. But we don't have a lot of information on that. Let's just hope and pray that the creators will come out with more chapter books or comic books about this subject, because I'm really interested and intrigued about it. But before I end this episode, I want to talk about one more last thing. So we know that there was a lot of refugees that made their way to the Earth Kingdom. But what if some of them made their way to the Fire Nation? Yes, you guessed it. I am talking about Ty Lee, being a descendant of the air nomads. And I know I'm not the only one who thinks it's true, because it's popular on Reddit. It's a popular theory on Reddit. There's 2 keys of Ty Lee's physical characteristics and her fighting style. If you compare her and Aang side by side, you can notice they both have similar round faces, big gray eyes, and the brownish hair. Even though we don't see Aang with hair that often, except in book 3, when he's in a coma after being shot by Azula's lightning and dying, and Katara bringing him back to life. Him being in the coma, he grows hair. He eventually does shave it off before he goes to fight Fire Lord Ozai. But when Aang has his flashbacks, you can tell that it was very common for air nomads to have round faces. But with the Fire Nation, their facial features were more defined. Like their eyes were gold and brown and even reddish. She also had a cheerful personality, like Aang and the other airbenders. She had that bubbly personality. She was always happy. She was light on her feet. Like, she was always just cheerful. So I truly believe that Ty Lee is a descendant of an air nomad. But what are your thoughts on it? Check out my socials and comment under my post about Ty Lee and let me know what you guys think. That's all for now, my benders and non-benders. If you want to hear more about my thoughts on Avatar, follow and rate my podcast, and don't forget to follow me on my socials. My link tree is in my bio. Till next time, my friends.